Well, hi, good morning, and thanks so much for joining me in my shop. But today I won't be doing any radio work. In fact, the last few days the weather has been so wonderful. I've been outside every day. I haven't been in my shop, but today is a very special day. Today is June 6th. June 6th, of course, is the anniversary of D-Day. So what I plan to do is I plan to read a few pages from this book. So this book is a battle diary. It's written by a soldier who landed on D-Day. His name is Charlie Martin, Charles Cromwell Martin. He's not a writer by any means, but he's written this book about his experiences in the Second World War from landing on D-Day, like shown in this photo, on for about a year. The thing about Charlie Martin is that one of the soldiers he fought with was Nils Lindenus, my father. So this book, which describes Charlie's story, is actually a description of my father's story. Let's just start with this picture. This is typical of battle art or war art depicting a raging battle. So you might think of this as what the Canadian forces looked like as they landed on the beach in Normandy. But it didn't look like this at all, as you'll hear as I describe what Charlie talks about here in the book. It's a very, very lonely affair attacking France from these boats. I won't go into it anymore other than to say they're showing the beach here very, very small. They have to do that for art reasons. But in fact the beach was huge because the tide was out when the boats landed. So I had to cross a huge, huge, huge beach to get up to this wall. You see the cement wall? Lucky for my father and other soldiers, there was a hole had been blown in this wall, or knocked in this wall by the Germans a few days before the invasion. And so my father was able to shoot through that, go through that hole. So anyway, you'll hear more in the book here. Looking for a particular picture. There we are. So here's a picture of the person who wrote the book, Charlie Martin, obviously during the war. It's a shot of him during the war. Here's another picture of him here as an older man, probably when he wrote the book, perhaps. Here's another picture of him here in France, and this other soldier with him is my father. And that's why this book is so important to me, and that's why I'm going to take some time to read my father's experience at landing on D-Day. I've lost the start here. Just give me a moment. So this is a map of the landing zone, the landing area, the Juno Beach. My father was in this boat, boat number 1. There's 9 boats, 10 boats. They're spread apart as they're landing, almost a football field apart. Each boat has, I think, about 40 guys in it. The total amount of men landing here is 400. 400 men landed on the beach just after sunrise and left there for 45 minutes to fight with the Germans before the next wave came. This is something I never understood about D-Day. I had this impression that 150,000 men all landed simultaneously and rushed into France. I didn't really understand that. It just doesn't work like that. So my father was among 400 Canadian soldiers in the Queen's Own Rifles landing on this beach. Like other beaches, same sort of thing going on in American beaches and British beaches and other Canadian beaches too. And there's a wall here, and just behind it is a railroad. Okay, I don't want to read this part here. I'll start here in the story. So what's happened is they're on the big ships and they've been loaded into the landing craft and they're touring around the big ships in the landing craft, waiting for time to be told to go into shore, just out of sight of the Germans on shore. So they're kind of over the horizon doing this. I'll start reading here. There came a 1-hour delay. This caused concern, since any delay would mean the assault would be in daylight, which turned out to be the case, instead of just before dawn. But we still had the comfort of the mothership as our assault boats continued to circle around the Moët. Finally, we turned south towards France. The shore was approximately 5 miles away, and as we approached it, we could see the rockets and naval guns firing through the night sky. We thought most of this would soften up our beachhead, but when we got there, we would find no signs of bombardment. Our Navy guns, in fact, had overshot the beaches, and all this heavy stuff should have been a signal to us that there were some very strong enemy positions inland. In the early dawn light, we noticed a single plane overhead, but only briefly. A long-range naval rocket took it out. We were about a mile from shore. As we moved farther from the mothership and closer to the shore, it came as a shock to realize the assault fleet just behind us had completely disappeared from view. Suddenly, there was just us and an awful lot of ocean, or English Channel if you prefer. Later depictions of D-Day by wartime artists and Hollywood filmmakers would typically show support planes overhead and the channel crowded with destroyers and battleships, the shore full of assault boats, beachmasters, and all that kind of thing. Not so with us. All that remained within sight was our own fleet of 10 assault craft, moving abreast in the early morning silence in a gradually extending line facing the shore. The A Company boats on the right and the B Company boats on the left. Daylight. We never felt so alone in our lives. There was mist and rain. Bernieres-Sur-Mer became visible. This is a town. Became visible. 1,500 yards of beach stretched from the far left to the far right, and everything was dead quiet. It could have been a picture postcard of any one of 100 tiny French beaches with a village behind. There wasn't much talk. Earlier, we worried a little about the choppy, heaving seas. Now, as we came closer, it was the strange silence that gripped us. But we were all confident. There was a job to be done. Each seemed to feel, let's do it. 10 boats, stretched out over 1,500 yards, is not really a whole lot of assault force. The boats began to look even tinier as the gaps widened, with more than the length of a football field between each. Our initial concept of a brave attack began to seem questionable, though none of us would admit it. We could see the houses and the buildings of the village. In between the village and the shore were the expected embedded obstacles, barbed wire and mines attached. In the center there was a formidable 15-foot wall with 3 heavy cement pillboxes. The entire beach was open to murderous fire from the machine guns positioned for a full 180-degree sweep. Military art puts forward a different scenario. The assault boats appear to be very close together and the troops within sight and sound of one another. This is likely necessary in order to get all the action into a reasonable frame. But in the actual event, it's really quite a different thing. As our assault craft continued moving forward, B Company's number 9 and number 10 boats headed even further to the left, and Peter Ray's boat, number 1, further to the right. Our own boat, number 2, headed south. Both Ray's boat and ours were looking at a breakwater and some serious-looking rocks on the right. Our first experience of action under fire started with a nervous gunner in one of the pillboxes. He opened fire prematurely, and a piece of metal cut Rifleman Cy Harden on the cheek. The Navy chap slapped a bandage on the wound and said, "If that's the worst you'll get, you'll be lucky." He was lucky, even though later that day an 88 shell landed very close to him, turning him as white as a sheet. He carried on with his section and survived to handle a concession after the war. But there were no hot dogs for him on this day. The crew of 2 were handling the boat well. That first burst of machine gun fire had stopped. The engine purred steadily and didn't seem to disturb the silence. We got closer. Things might have been different if we had run into heavy shore guns or enemy aircraft. The lieutenant came forward to speak to me. We could see some of our other boats seeming to drift out, not in line at all, as we got closer. What now? Take us in as fast as you can, I ordered. Don't slow up. Keep us going. It was better to move directly and at high speed than to chance drifting as easy targets or broadsiding obstacles or mines. And I thought the speed would keep the bow higher and get us closer into shore. He gave a signal to the sailor in the stern. Go to speed. Everyone seemed calm and ready. The boat commander was in charge of this part. He would give our landing order. We waited for it. In just a few inches of water, the prow grated onto the beach, and the order rang out, down ramp. The moment the ramp came down, heavy machine gun fire broke out from somewhere back of the seawall. Mortars were dropping all over the beach. Possibly, number 1 boat took more of the fire. The men rose. Starboard line turning right, port turning left. I said to Jack across from me and to everyone, move, fast. Don't stop for anything. Go, go, go. We raced down the ramp, Jack and I side by side, the men closely following. We fanned out as fast as we could, heading for that seawall. None of us really grasped at that point, spread across such a large beachfront, just how thin on the ground we were. Each of the 10 boats had become an independent fighting unit. None had communication with the other, although just before our touchdown, we were all within sight of one another. We were on our own, and in our first action. Every single one of us, from Elliot Dalton, our commanding officer, who was the leader for his boat, and the other A Company boat leaders, Jack Pond, Peter Ray, Dave Owen, to the ordinary soldier, who was on the run at top speed. We were all riflemen on the assault. There was nothing ordinary about any of us. During our training, when we reached the beach, we all formed up under our section and platoon commanders with no difficulty. But now we were attacking formidable fortifications in entirely different formations and under machine gun and mortar fire from all angles. That first rush, racing across the beach, scaling the wall, crossing the open railway line that ran parallel to the beach, all under heavy machine gun fire, claimed a lot of us in the first minute or two. I'm going to stop here for a moment and just say that the Queen's Own Rifles in Canada is considered the unit that was most heavily wounded and killed during the D-Day landing. Lots of units took lots. There's no doubt about it. But historically, Queen's Own Rifles is considered the attack that suffered the worst, and that's of the British, American, and Canadian forces. About half the men in my dad's Queen's Own Rifles didn't make it across the beach into the battle. They were either killed or wounded. I'll continue now. The section and platoon leaders were primary targets and fast became casualties. Number 9 platoons of Lieutenant Peter C. Ray was wounded twice. His NCOs, Charles Smith and Bill Brown, were wounded on the beach. It was low tide and we had a wide expanse to cover. Others in number 1 were killed in the heavy fire they took. Hugh Rocks, who had been such a good lightweight fighter, George Dezelle, Gil May, Hector G. Bruyere, William McBride, Tommy Pierce. I'm going to stop again and just mention, because I didn't read the first part of the book. The Canadian soldiers had trained for this for almost 4 years. So my father spent 4 years with these men, these same men, training first in Canada and then later in England for this. 4 years with these guys, having never seen a battle until they step off the boat here on D-Day. Of the men from our boat, Jack Simpson was killed on the beach and Jack Culbertson was wounded. Jamie McKechnie, who only hours earlier helped grab me into the LCA and doubtlessly saved my life, was killed, and so was Ernie Cunningham and Sammy Hall. 2 men from Boat 4 came over our way, we discovered later at the barbed wire. They were Jim Catling and Herman Stock, and somehow their race against the fire found them over near our position. Herman Stock was an Iroquois from the Gibson Reserve near Bala, Ontario. Of course, he was nicknamed Chief from the day he enlisted back in 1940. In training and in action, he always led the way. Our boat had landed about 100 yards from a section where sand dunes about 5 to 6 feet in height had built up in front of the wall. The enemy had been busy reinforcing their defenses. As we raced across the beach, we had no time to think much. Our training did that for us. We were men who could run 60 miles with a 25-pound pack. First-class marksmen, about 30% in the sniper class, and all of us drilled in the credo of don't stop for anything. Our part of the beach was clear, but there were mines buried in the sand. On the dead run, you could just choose the path that looked best. Bert Shepard and Bill Bettridge and I were running at top speed and firing from the hip. To our left, we spotted a small gap in the wall. It looked like it had been made so bulldozers could get through to the beach to move obstacles and that sort of thing. They had placed a belt-fed machine gun there as part of the defense, and only one man was on it. He was waving his arms furiously as if calling for others to come up and get on the gun. It would take 2 to operate it, 1 to feed the belt and 1 to do the firing. At that time of the morning, they could have been shaving, having breakfast, or just generally not ready for some fast-moving assault troops. We knew from our training that you cannot be on the move and fire accurately at the same time. If you stop, you become a target. In any case, Bill did stop for a split second. He took his aim, and that seemed to be the bullet that took the gunner out, although Bert and I were firing too. We got to the wall and over it, then raced across the railway line. The Marine from our landing craft was with us. He tried to get off the beaches, but the boat had hit a mine and sunk, so he picked up a rifle and just joined us in the assault. Now, as we were about to move further ahead, he asked if we minded if he left. He felt he should follow his orders and get on another boat and return to the mothership for more duty, and we didn't object. To both sides of us we had minefields. The machine gun fire and mortars never let up, a barrage of shelling that seemed to come from everywhere. Once over the railway, we had some grass cover, but we ran into heavy barbed wire. Shep and Bill looked a little surprised that we had got this far. Then Shepard began to get annoyed about the wire blocking our way, sort of interfering with his day. We had to decide whether to cut the wire here and move straight ahead to the houses 200 yards away, or cut the wire to the left, or to the right, or move in that direction. We decided to go straight ahead. Then as an aside, before reaching that decision, I checked the sides. We couldn't move through the ditch because they'd strung wire at intervals from the bottom up, almost to the train rails. So I inched my way up and took a look. That's when I saw the Chief and Jim Catling. They were on the rail line, caught by the fire. Jim had one hand on the far rail as though he was trying to drag himself across when life left him. There was a brief discussion, necessarily very brief under constant machine gun fire and mortar fire, about who should have the wonderful privilege of cutting those heavy strands of barbed wire. Bert Shepard was the kind of person who, no matter how serious the situation might be, couldn't resist prolonging it with an argument. On that day he threatened to run true to form. He was a fine soldier and a highly qualified sniper. I was his trainer for his group back in England. But that was not the time and the place for him to go on and on about how wire cutting was not his specialty, and I was closer, the CSMs were paid more, etc., etc. So guess who cut the wire? Years after the war, Bill and especially Shep enjoyed recounting this episode. I cut the strands and bent them back, making an opening just wide enough for a man to belly through. The grass gave us cover. The enemy knew we were somewhere, and likely on the move, but they could not pinpoint us. We crept through. By this time there were about 15 of us. My father's one of the 15. Then we came to the minefield. In situations like this, the leader gives the signal to cross the minefield, and everybody is supposed to start at the same time. I advanced about 10 paces and stepped on a jumping mine. When this goes up into the air, it spreads old nails and buckshot, whatever its makers have put into it, over a large area, maybe 150 to 200 feet. But if you keep your foot on it, it won't go off. So I held my foot in place and got everyone to the far side, over the fence and into the gardens by the houses. To avoid the spray effect, you drop to the ground quickly right beside the mine. Perhaps I stood a second or two too long on the mine, and as I leaned forward ready to flop, a bullet somehow hit the inside of my helmet. It spun round and around on the inside and took my helmet right off. I released the mine. It exploded, jumping 5 or so feet in the air, but I had flattened myself on the ground. Seconds later I leapt up and left the scene, proceeding across the minefield with some relief, but no helmet, at what you might be able to call top speed. We took fairly heavy machine gun fire until we got right into the village of Bernieres-Sur-Mer. At that point we decided to split up into 2 sections, but we lacked a second section leader. All the NCOs in my boat had been killed, but me. Rifleman Jimmy Sackfield stepped forward to fill in the role, and we divided up. Jimmy took his section. Alex Alexander, Steve Dubois, Jack Leather, Ernie Hackett, Jeff Oliver, and Sid Willis around behind the houses. The rest of us, Jimmy Young, Bill Bettridge, Bert Shepard, Lindy Lindenus, that's my dad, and myself, decided to go straight down the road to the right of the church. So I'm going to stop reading at this point because this is a long book. And it covers basically the whole time Charlie Martin was in Europe, and my dad was with him the whole time. There's Charlie Martin. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm looking for a particular photograph here, which I'm not finding. Maybe it's towards the back. So I think I'm going to end with this picture. Lindy Lindenus Wright and myself, likely around the time we were sharing a slit trench at Grethenville. So this is quite a period after D-Day, maybe a month or so after D-Day. There's my dad. So my dad lived to be 93. He died in long-term care, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. Never ever spoke about the war. When I was a young kid, I would ask him questions, and we would watch a movie on TV. I would ask him questions. Dad, was it like that? Dad, did you kill anybody? Dad. And his answer was always the same. Jim, it was a long time ago. I don't remember anything. Yeah, I'm sure he remembered all of it. So thank you, Charlie Martin. Charlie Martin has passed away now. Thank you, Charlie Martin, for having written this book. Because without this book, I wouldn't really know what my dad did. I wouldn't know that he was among the first soldiers to land on D-Day. I wouldn't know that he was essentially alone with a small group of men fighting. I wouldn't have known any of these things. So thank you, Mr. Martin. And thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad, for being a great soldier and a great father.